So,
And it's a historical document. Like you look at, you
right.
know, books from the 70s and they look like books from the 70s.
Yeah.
And they're like clothes that way. You know, they say a lot about the era in which they were published.
Right, right.
They're kind of, they sort of, you know, they're a record of when the book was bought, when it was published, like what was going on in the world when that book was published. And,
Yeah.
you know, and then for somebody to like, you know, you just see a book and you kind of remember where you bought it and,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's
you know, there's just something really kind of untextured and impersonal about reading it on a screen. The thing I think people really underestimate, aren't quite aware of how time-consuming writing is, and it's the one thing that constantly surprises me, amazes me. I can do nothing about. You know, it takes the time that it will take, and it can't be rushed, and it's kind of a slow process, and um, the process is made even slower, you know, by reworking it, and making it seem like it didn't take so much time to write.
Right.
You know, like there's that sort of thing of like, I've had a few people say, you know, you make it look so easy about this book about sweet Jesus, after having read it, and I feel very gratified by that, because as a crafts person, you know, I want that illusion, but it is an illusion, and I know how much work went into making it look like it was kind of,
Yeah.
you know, didn't take a lot of work, or wasn't, you know, it's not full of effort. I don't want the reader to see all that effort, but it takes a lot of work to remove the effort, to remove the self-consciousness, to remove the information that you could, you know, I mean, it's a stylistic thing too. Like, I like books that feel like life, that don't feel like, you know, academic treatises, that don't, I mean, I think there's a place for those books as well, but stylistically, the kind of writer I aspire to be is somebody who can create an illusion where somebody enters a book, you know, the suspension of disbelief occurs, and there's nothing that alerts them to, you know, the puppet master at any point.
Yeah.
Where there are writers who are all about that display. You know, name is he's a virtuoso kind of puppet master, and he's always on the page doing these sort of pyrotechnic things, which at the end of the book you applaud because they're virtuosic.
For sure.
um, but that's the style of writing, and I happen to, you know, belong in a camp which is different, where I try to be invisible, and I try to bury what I know, and I try to make, you know, I try to make the experience. I try to make the realizations that I want to be in the book, the insight that I want to be in the book. I try to make that the property of the reader, something the reader has to discover. Yeah, it's a bit of, you know, it's a lot of effort goes into making it appear artless. And that's also something I love in a book is, you come in contact with a story, and a narrator and a point of view, but it's also, you know, everything's passed through this filter of somebody else's consciousness. So you're also really interacting with human consciousness. You know, a book like Tender as the Night, it's just, you know, the setting is Fitzgerald's mind, and then there's the story and the characters and everything, but you're sitting in the theater of his mind. That, you know, seems to be so obvious. And I don't think there's any other art form that really does that, as well as a novel. You know, you get to sit in the theater of somebody's mind for a long time, so you are, you know, it's like, it's existentially deeply reassuring sometimes to be in the presence of an intelligence that you understand, that can convey wisdom, can confirm some human experiences, you know, like, okay, yeah, this is what it is, this is what it means to have consciousness, to have a morality, to grapple with it, to see the world, to see it, you know, flavored this way by, you know, the author's experience. And it's not that you will share the same perceptions or the same, you know, repertoire of images or repertoire of, you know, illusions, but you have your own. It's just confirming that that is part of subjectivity, you know, that so what ends up being kind of reassuring on a universal level is not the similarities, but the differences.
Right.
Because you have your own idiosyncrasies, but what is confirmed is that we all have idiosyncratic ways of being, you know, and that's on the, you know, but we still have, there's still at the center of that enough similarity to communicate and convey that. And then, you know, on the periphery of that are all these differences that can be appreciated and learned from. I really think that every flashy, grand gesture in life begins in a subtle moment. And I'm interested more in those subtle moments than the grand gestures that the subtle moments give birth to. So I like subtlety. I feel, you know, I think the sort of general commercial successful diet of books is not a diet that contains enough subtlety. I think people are not being educated enough in the subtleties that I think literary fiction excels at. You know, we want big stories, we want action, adventure, fantasy, and all of that, you know, is great entertainment. But if we don't also have in our diet quiet, subtle books, we've lost an education in a certain realm of human experience. And if we're not aware of those subtleties, then we become we become prey to the grand gestures. We live in a world of grand gestures, big political movements, and we don't understand how to control those because we don't understand the subtle motives and moments that drive these things. But, you know, and that's, you know, for me, a moral mission of literature. Wow. And it's, I think it's so, that arena in literature right now is so small, and it's not getting enough airtime, and it's not being pushed. And, you know, I think there was an era where publishers too felt like at least some aspect of their company was to educate, you know, and to educate the reader and to make available the things on that level that were edifying, you know, morally and intellectually edifying. And I feel like with, you know, the reduction to marketability, profitability, that, you know, has really shrunk. I think it's, you know, it's a crisis of education when those kinds of books don't get published or and, you know, and I think it's, you know, it's like all things, readers need to be taught a bit how to appreciate that kind of stuff. I teach a creative writing class at U of T, and you know, if a story is hard, my students don't like it. You know, they all come back and say, it was all right, but it was a lot of work, like, had to really concentrate. And it's like, yeah, that's a shame, isn't it? Like, to work a little bit. But if you can give them the keys, the tools to interpret those things, then suddenly it's not that they don't want to do the work, it's that if they don't know how, they can't. And then they just become, you know, it's a futile enterprise. So they need to be given a couple of keys and tools to just unlock some of the things. I don't know, I don't want to go on too long about this because it, you know, I certainly don't want it to seem like an elitist literary kind of endeavor, but you know, I just think that we're losing a little bit our ability to appreciate subtle, nuanced things, and that is what resides underneath on an emotional level. Big grand gestures. So it's relevant to politics, it's relevant to government, it's relevant to Rob Ford and, you know, the economy and, you know, justice and all, you know, everything. Education, how kids are treated, how old people are treated.
You were talking about this is as a diet, and it's sort of akin to going into a big grocery store, and they tell you that you should avoid the middle aisles. So basically, like, the easiest access that you have in a grocery store are to food items that basically are already prepared. They have everything already that you need, just heat and serve. Whereas if you go in your average store, if you go around the outer edges, well, that's where you find things that are a little more expensive. It's going to take time, it's going to take effort, and you actually have to put your imagination into place and trying to figure out how to actually take all of these ingredients and make something out of them. And so this, you know,
it's a perfect metaphor. It's a
yeah.
perfect metaphor. Yeah. Like, would you, you know, it takes a little bit of work to, you know, to make a complex or, you know, a salad with 4 things in it rather than grabbing a, you know, a loaf of bread and a jar of peanut butter, you know?
But, you know, and it's funny because you can see how, like, you know, especially if you've got like a family of 4 or something like that, to go down the middle aisle, that's going to be your cheapest route in and out, you know? So it's also, this is the thing about literature, is that I think people think that there is some sort of cost associated with it, that the labor that you put, the sort of labor you're talking about, you know, that your students or readers have to sort of invest, that it feels like there should be a, well, to extend the metaphor, a cookie. You know, like what's going, like what cookie are we going to get for having done all of this work? You know, where's the dessert for having prepared and eaten a salad?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I get, yeah, exactly. Like, it depends on your palate too. Like, there's nothing for me as I would prefer salad if it's, you know, made to the way I like a salad.
Yeah.
You know, because I love that taste. Like, it's not necessarily about sweetness. You know.
Yeah.
But no, I think people. You know, people want their books to be comfort food. You know, they want to curl up at the end of a hard day and, you know, under the duvet and escape into a fantasy, or, you know, just have everything, you know, entertainingly described for them. They don't have to do any work. I mean, I think, and I understand that, right? I mean, life is hard and people are, you know, life is hard and very, very, very busy, you know. So people, you know, you have to make time. You have to. It has to be a priority in order for you to make time to read those kinds of books.
Right.
And yeah, we're not in a culture which really extols the virtue of it. You know.
Mm-hmm.
So you're a little bit going against the current to even make time for it.
Yeah.
I always find it interesting too, talking to my students. There's another thing that. We often feel like writing is an intellectual medium, but I think it's a very visual medium.
Mm-hmm.
And I think great books have a component in them that address the senses through mind. So I try to encourage my students to not forget about what things look like or smell like or taste like, or, you know, because what you're doing with words, like, it's a word medium. But words are, well, you can't, you know, words are used to communicate and to describe ideas and stuff, but if you remain in that area as a writer, it's going to be very, it's going to be very dry for the reader. It's not going to come alive, because what comes alive is the theater, the visual theater. You have to have a visual correlative, you know, to what you're reading. If you don't have that, then you don't have a full story. You have description, or you have exposition, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So I just try to, you know. So I think there's a great kind of alchemy that happens with words off the page that turn into theater in the mind. If you can delight in the character you're writing about, mm-hmm. then you will make them. I mean, the more delight you can have in your head about the character you're writing about, the fleshier they will be, you know, in your mind, the fleshier, therefore the fleshier they will be on the page, mm-hmm. the harder you'll work at giving them a broader expanse on the page, because, so I think for me, the lesson was take delight and love your characters, and they will live beyond the page.
Wow. Whew. Good job.